We are ready for our 2017 state legislative session wrap-up, and I'd like to invite our District 17 delegation forward. With them are Senator Cheryl Kagan, Delegate Kumar Barve, Delegate Andrew Platt, and Delegate Jim Gilchrist. Welcome and thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. For the record, Delegate Andrew Platt here to present. Honored to be here. Thanks, Mayor and Council, for having me. Start off talking briefly about a bill I passed that I'm pretty proud about. It increases awareness for tax claimants in the state for the Earned Income Tax Credit. As you know, the EITC is one of the best government tools for poverty alleviation that the state has, but unfortunately Maryland ranks 27th in the country for EITC claim rate. Only about 74% of those folks that are eligible to claim the EITC do so, and there are tens of thousands of families that live in poverty in Maryland that are lifted out of poverty through claiming the EITC. Thousands of families in the city of Rockville right here. So what this bill does is it works with the Maryland Department of Human Resources to create a modeling program through demographic and consumer data to pick out who is likeliest to actually be an EITC recipient, and then let them know through email, text, and direct mail that they're likely eligible for the EITC. Right now, most EITC awareness actually happens through nonprofit groups, and it's pretty untargeted. So they'll create a heat map through a zip code analysis of the lowest income zip codes in the state, and then sort of just print out a flyer and go to the most dense apartment complexes and buildings and put a flyer in the lobby. So it's not really effective, so we did a smart kind of Moneyball approach to go after the lowest income folks in the state who will be lifted out of poverty through claiming this tax credit, and they can actually backfile up to 3 years. So it's a pretty good chunk of change that they're going to be able to claim that they likely did not know about before. To give you a quick rundown of some of the budgetary items, school construction, we got a one-time increase of $10 million for the next year. That happened through a one-time $22.8 million allocation through the High Enrollment Growth Program. While I'd love to sit up here and really champion $10 million, which is a good chunk of change, I think, you know, with the county adding a high school's population of students every year, that even when we push as hard as we did this year to get the additional $10 million, it's really kind of a drop in the bucket compared to what we need. So I'd love to work with you and other relevant stakeholders to see what we can do on sort of a delegation basis, working with cities who are experiencing the most explosive population growth in the county to actually get more funding, not only from Annapolis, but see what we can do at the county level as well. State aid to county increased by $28 million from $754 to $782. $195 million in non-transportation capital investments. Some local related projects, $2.8 million in capital for Julius West Middle School, and $8.8 million for Montgomery College Rockville Student Service Center. One of the things I would love to talk to Mayor and Council about further, possibly offline, could be maybe be an MML priority for next year. Over the past few months, I've had a lot of discussion with sort of mayors and city councilors through a national organization I'm a part of. And one of the biggest sort of innovative, exciting, but also challenging things they're working on is working with their state and county stakeholders to get innovative grant funding to plan for city and urban planning purposes for the upcoming sort of trend in autonomous vehicles, and how that's going to completely sort of reshape urban and city planning from a transportation grid perspective. And given the sort of patchwork urban planning that happens between cities, counties, and the state, I'd love to maybe talk with the mayor and council and see if we can get MMO on board for trying to create some sort of state innovation grant where cities can apply for a little bit of state funding to actually study how the next decade of city planning is actually going to change, because I think it's going to happen quickly. Most of the experts predict sort of mass adaptation in the next 15 years. They're expecting about 60 to 70% of car use by 2030 is going to be autonomous, and that's going to completely change parking, property value. It's going to change everything, and so I'd love to work with you on that. Another thing I'd like to work with you on, which I think would be great for Rockville, is expanding MARC service both ways, and actually making it a dedicated commuter line, which I think would be great for the central corridor of the county, but also for District 17 and Rockville in particular. So I'd be happy to talk with you offline or answer any questions here, but just thanks for allowing me to present, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome, Delegate Gilchrist.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'm Delegate Jim Gilchrist. It's nice to be here. So I'll just jump right into the budget. we were faced with a $300 million shortfall this year, and despite that, we were able to finish the budget on time. We held in-state tuition to less than a 2% increase. We increased Medicaid by over 5%, watching out for the most vulnerable, for health care in the state. We did a lot for higher ed capital costs and for school construction, over $350 million, K through 12. With that in the background, and the numbers are actually going to be getting a little bit worse in the coming years, so the budget is going to continue to be tight. One of your priorities this year was senior services and programs, and we did a few things there which were mostly forward-looking. We have a lot of programs that are currently running. We established a healthy aging program. This is at Maryland Department of Aging, and the Secretary of Aging says that they can only request grant funds from the federal government if the state specifically has given them permission to do that work. So we passed a bill which gave them a lot more permission, so they'll be able to go after a lot more grant funding. We also set up a task force for long-term care education. People need to plan for how they're going to provide health care into their senior years. It's a real question of affordability, how to get insurance. This task force will be reporting to us in December. And finally, I want to point out in this area, we also established a commission to monitor what the federal government is doing with health care. Soon thereafter, the U.S. House passed their bill, which somewhat completely changed the Affordable Health Care Act. But we set up a commission, it's 19 members, to look at what they're doing, to see if they're going after Medicare, Medicaid, and what they're going to do to what we often call Obamacare. That will also be important and forward-looking. We did maintain the Youth Services Bureau funding, which I know Recreation and Parks runs here. Up in Gaithersburg, it's handled by Family Services. We did maintain that funding statewide at $1.8 million. And the bond bill for King Farm, we got some money for the barns at King Farm. Anyway, that's a couple of your areas, and I thought it was a good session. I look forward to seeing you all at the Memorial Day Parade and at Hometown Holidays.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, Delegate Barve.
Well, Madam Mayor, members of the council, it's great to be here. We had a terrific year. Let me start out, though, by complimenting you for the wonderful flags that we see in downtown Rockville in the town center. Maybe you might want to consider relocating the Russian flag to be outside of Samovar and the Greek flag outside of Trapezoid. Oh, who might have micromanaged you on this? Anyway, it's lovely, and
Join the crowd.
it says a lot about Rockville and the kind of city we are, and the diversity of our population, which makes us stronger, better, and more interesting. And so let me just get right into it. As you know, I'm the chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee, and this was a very successful year for the environment. We, of course, passed a resolution. I introduced and passed unanimously a resolution that criticized the proposal by the Trump administration to zero out bay restoration funding. That was reversed by Congress. I am not brassy enough to take credit for that, but every little bit helps. And the fact of the matter is that that's going to be an ongoing struggle. It's important because a lot of the pollution into the Chesapeake Bay doesn't originate in Maryland. It originates in Pennsylvania and Virginia, and only the federal government can really take up the cause of protecting the Chesapeake Bay. We can't do it by ourselves, and it's unfair for Maryland citizens and farmers to take up the entire task of cleaning up the bay. By the way, the actual health of the bay has been improving steadily over the last 3 years, and we got a C- grade, which I know doesn't sound very impressive, but when you started an F, a C- is actually an improvement. So hoping to get to that solid B I got in college and past that. Hopefully it'll be as smart as Cheryl was when she was in college. So just joking, all of you probably got straight A's and I didn't. In any case, Maryland became the first state in the union to legislatively ban fracking in our state. And I will say that this was done after 2.5 years of very intense study of the science, and part of the scientific study involved a health assessment on what was going on in Pennsylvania, and some of the negative effects of methane leakage in the air were premature births and birth defects and a lot of other very bad health outcomes in exchange for the very small amount of money Maryland would have gotten and the possible long-term cost associated with leakage and groundwater contamination. We made the decision that it wasn't worth it, and I will say that Governor Hogan did join us in this. Of course, the fact that we passed the bill through my committee in the House with veto-proof majorities, I'm sure, was part of the impetus for the governor going from thinking that fracking was a gold mine to a gigantic disaster, but we welcome the governor and his support on that issue. Delegate Gilchrist did not mention it, but he was the floor leader for a bill to protect oyster sanctuaries in the Chesapeake Bay, and it's important. A lot of people just think they're yummy, which they are, but one oyster filters 40 gallons of water every day in the Chesapeake Bay. So we need more oysters, and we need to not raid the sanctuaries that we currently have. We strengthened the laws with respect to the use of antibiotics in livestock animals, which is, of course, a problem nationally because it breeds antibiotic resistance. And so we in Maryland are one of the states that are taking the lead on this. And we also put an end to a rather barbaric practice of having contests in the Chesapeake Bay, Eastern Shore, Southern Maryland, of what were slaughters of a marine animal called the cow-nose ray. It's a manta ray type creature. They migrate from the coast of Africa into the Chesapeake Bay where they spawn, and they were basically holding contests to find out how many of these animals you could kill. They were dumping the bodies in dumpsters. It was, I mean, truly shocking and barbaric, and we've implemented a 3-year halt to this practice, and the Department of Natural Resources is going to actually look into a scientific population control strategy, as we do for all marine life in the Chesapeake Bay. And finally, on transportation, I just want to say that, well, 2 things. Of course, there was the grant, the annual grant for the highway user revenue fund that we always get. We haven't succeeded in being able to convince the Senate. And by the way, if I'm critical of the Senate, it's not Senator Kagan, because she's always on the correct side of many of these controversial issues. So if I say the Senate made a mistake, it's not her. There's some resistance, and it's legitimate, in the Budget and Tax Committee with respect to making permanent the highway user revenue formula, which all 4 of us support. We're still working on that and hope to succeed next year. And we passed, as a legislature, and the governor signed, a Metro Safety Commission law, which mirrors what passed in Virginia and in D.C. This is a requirement that the Federal Department of Transportation has laid down upon us in order to move forward with what will hopefully be a comprehensive strategy to improve the metro system. That's obviously a big problem for us. I also want to mention stormwater. No bill passed this year with respect to stormwater. Rockville has unique challenges and needs that we are very aware of. Currently, you're not getting any money from the county. But I'm hopeful that over the interim, working with MML, working with the city of Rockville and Gaithersburg and Montgomery County, that we will be able to negotiate a settlement that will be beneficial to the to our citizens in both Rockville, Gaithersburg, and throughout Montgomery County. It is a complex issue, and I enjoy working with your staff. I especially enjoy working with Linda Moran, who does a terrific job for the city of Rockville. Where is she? There she is. And of course, it's that kind of teamwork that makes us successful. And I will conclude, because I'm an accountant, I have to mention this. As you know, the Rockville-Gaithersburg area has about 1/8 of the population of Montgomery County, but we got damn near 50% of the capital improvement money out of the state budget, and that includes projects such as the ones that were mentioned by Jim Gilchrist and others. They add up to $101 million of capital projects for the Rockville, Gaithersburg cities and the close-in areas, and so that's the kind of teamwork we like to pride ourselves in, and of course you're a part of our team, and I look forward to working closely with all 5 of you and your staff. And with that, let me introduce my favorite senator, Cheryl Kagan.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. I just came from a CMR, Community Ministries of Rockville, series of meetings, and you all know that I work there as my part-time job, but for those who are watching or in the audience, they may not know that we are celebrating our 50th anniversary and celebrating all we do for folks who need to learn English, need housing assistance, need protection from emergency eviction, have the Casement Health Clinic, and help people age in place with the elderly ministries. And I'm so proud to be a part of that team. We're doing a lot of great things as we celebrate our 50th year. Wanted to first thank all of you and everyone who came down and visited us, either on District 17 night in Annapolis. I think the bus was a great idea, and I hope we do that again next year. We didn't have snow, so that helped. And everybody who was in touch with us by phone, by email, coming down and lobbying us, or being in touch with me in particular, and with all of us, but through Twitter, through Facebook, through Instagram. It's a great way of being in touch, and I'm very active on all of those. The legislative session began and ended with veto overrides. There are many ways that we, as a Democratic majority legislature, work with the governor, who's a Republican, and some places where we have fundamental disagreements. Unfortunately, in the beginning, it was a question of renewable energy, and we had a much more green attitude in the legislation that we passed, and he didn't think that he was ready for that. We overrode the veto, and that's now law. Questions about education, questions about redistricting have all come up, and there's still an opportunity for him to veto, yet we haven't passed that deadline. Delegate Barve mentioned fracking. He didn't quite give himself enough credit. He was really a prominent and valuable leader and really helped make sure that Maryland was the first state with fracking reserves, with the potential, not just a symbolic thing, but really speaking out. It could have created some jobs, but it also would have created a huge public health implication and environmental degradation. So he really did amazing work. Paid sick leave, earned sick leave for businesses of at least 15 people was enacted this year. We will see what the governor does with that. We're kind of waiting to hear. He came out with in favor of it after it was clear that we had the votes of any business that had at least 50 employees. Well, I think we know that most businesses that are the size that have at least 50 employees already offer sick leave to their employees. So it really would have virtually no implications and not help a parent who needs to decide whether they're going to pay their rent, buy the food and stuff, or stay home with a sick child, or stay home themselves when they're not feeling well, versus infecting us through their food and stuff. We did a lot of work because of what's going on in Washington with the new administration. We don't know the implications, but certainly there's a trickle-down effect. Kumar referenced the cuts to the Bay, and he said Congress took action on that. But if Congress decides to defund Planned Parenthood, we need to make sure that reproductive care and general health care is available for Marylanders. The Constitutional Convention, because of some of the crazy stuff that's going on down there, Maryland had asked for a Constitutional Convention on issues like a balanced budget and school prayer and some stuff dating back decades and decades. And so we just said, rather than risk opening up Pandora's box, we decided to just withdraw all of our past calls and just say we're okay with our Constitution the way it is and don't want to open up that fear. Kumar also mentioned metro safety, which is the very first bill this year that the governor signed. I just want to make it clear to anyone watching that the last installment of Safe Track, making sure that we increase safety, reliability, and are repairing various parts of our metro system. The red line is going to be the last part. It's going to be closed again in June for the last time. There are some implications, and people need to think now about whether they can telecommute, how else they might get to their jobs or tourist activities. I was really glad that I was able to get $1 million from the governor to fund shuttle buses so that we could make sure that they were quick and available and not come out of the county or city coffers. That just didn't seem reasonable. So that was good. Drug price gouging. We've all heard about the EpiPen and some other scandalous behavior by some drug developers. At the same time, we need to encourage the new medicines that help save lives, and we here in the high-tech corridor are especially grateful to have those jobs, to have that innovation. But there's responsible pricing, and then there's really rip-off. And so the legislature enacted really prudent legislation that enables the Attorney General to take action if someone really does something egregious. I can't read that. I scribbled this in the car. I had a lot of my own legislation. Delegate Platt talked about his bill. I did a lot of work on consumer protection and identity theft privacy, some election law reform. I had 2 bills on nonprofit sector, and I was really proud to enact, and it's going to be signed on Thursday, along with the rest of my bills. I named it the acronym NIMBLE, and it's the Nonprofit Interest-Free Micro Bridge Loan Bills. And the idea is that there are nonprofits that get grants or contracts from the city, from the county, from the state, or even from the federal government. But sometimes there's a delay between the award and the arrival of the check. And in the meantime, those nonprofits have to pay their bills. They have to pay their staff and the rent and all that. So we're going to have a revolving fund that helps them borrow. Sometimes they said just $5,000 or $10,000, helps them stay focused on their mission, and they'll be able to borrow at no interest rate, and hopefully a very low bar to entry, up to $25,000. I continued to work on the 911 bill, upgrading our public safety. Once again, we named it in memory of Rockville's own Carl Henn, who was tragically lost. Carl is unfortunately not the only Rockville resident who was lost to a 911 failure. We lost another Rockville resident, and what I kept saying was, when 911 fails, people die. And Maryland needs to move forward towards next-gen 911, updating our training, our software, our hardware, the interconnection and all that. I have traveled the state from Kent County, Charles County, Baltimore City, Prince George's, Montgomery, Frederick. I mean, I've really been all over, and I've brought a couple of my Senate colleagues to their own 911 system so that they can understand how urgent a need this is. We did pass the bill in the Senate. We passed it unanimously, and every single member of the Finance Committee from both parties asked to be added on as co-sponsors. It had great energy, and then it died for failure of a vote in the House at the end. And Kumar was kind enough to try to help, but sometimes we run out of time when we work too long on a bill to try to make it perfect. We are going to be holding hearings and working on it in the coming months. I want to thank Rockville for your support and your efforts on the polystyrene ban. As folks who are watching probably know, styrofoam is really a health hazard and an environmental hazard. Don't ever nuke your leftovers. If it's in styrofoam, don't ever heat it up. Heat releases carcinogenic chemicals, and so that's just a bad idea. Don't drink your coffee from a styrofoam cup. Montgomery County, Prince George's County, DC, Gaithersburg, and 80 other jurisdictions around the state, and hopefully Rockville soon, have all banned polystyrene. A delegate from Baltimore City and I worked together to try to make that ban statewide, and there was great interest. That didn't move this year. We're already working on the future. Sometimes it's not just the bills you pass, but it's the bills you kill that are important. And you know that I worked very closely with you all to kill a bill that really would have burdened and made quite unpredictable the fiscal implications of lawsuits. And Senate Bill 705 kept rearing its head. We thought it was dead and it would rise up again and we'd kill it or put it on hold for long enough. It did die. We expect that it may come back next year, but hopefully we will work with the cities, the counties, the attorneys, and everyone and come up with something that is reasonable and not something that would hurt our municipalities. We may have a special session. There are a number of outstanding issues, including veto override. Another issue, and I talked about it here last year, and I was sure we were going to get it done this year, but I talked last year about if a woman is raped, and if she becomes pregnant as a result of the rape, that if she courageously decides to continue to bring a pregnancy to term and decides that she wants to give her newborn up for adoption, that she actually needs her rapist's permission. That's crazy. And last year, all of your jaws dropped. That was 8 years and we didn't get it done. This was the 9th year. On the last night of session, there was a conference committee because the House and Senate passed 2 different versions. They were both kind of glacially moving, but they had to iron out the differences. And when I found out where the conference committee was meeting, and you might have seen I was quoted in a bunch of places about this, turns out the conference committee was 6 men. Not sure who was thinking that one through, but it seems to me when we're talking about rape and childbirth that there ought to be a woman in the room. So I went to where the conference committee was meeting, and I stood there kind of towering. They were sitting on 2 sofas, and I stood over them and crossed my arms. And then another woman senator came over, and she stood next to me, crossed her arms. It was like, you guys, like you better flip and get this thing done. So we adjourn at midnight. And about 11:10, 11:15 at night, they came up with an agreement, and the print shop couldn't get it done on time to print the hundreds of copies that it takes to then bring back to the Senate, back to the House for a final vote. So if and when there's a special session between now and next January, a lot of us are going to be pushing very hard to see if we can get that on the agenda. If it's not on the agenda of the special session, it better move in January. We should be able to move this and get that done. Maryland is one of a very small number of states that still has that archaic law. I want to also join my colleagues in thanking your staff and thanking all of you. It's really a pleasure to work with you all, with Rob DeSpirito, with Linda Moran, with the department heads, with Kathleen, with Deborah. I mean, it's really a team effort on a lot of issues, and sometimes we really need a quick turnaround, and are glad to be your partner. And I just want to point out my newest piece of jewelry, which is Delegate Barve and I were both just named last week, and Madam Chair, thank you for your leadership of the Maryland Municipal League. But once again this year, I was named a Maryland Municipal League Superstar, which is a really high honor and something I'm very proud to have. And I now have a pin to prove it, which is kind of great, and look forward to continuing to work together. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Any comments or questions, council members? Councilmember Hunley.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Please.
I want to thank each and every one of you for your hard work and for your teaming with us and working so well with us. There are a lot of things that have long-term, long-range results that are not good. And the fracking, I was so happy that, you know, that's a done deal now. So I want to thank you for all of your work.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Feinberg.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to echo what my colleagues said. I don't want to take too much of their time. One in particular, Senator Kagan, the NIMBLE. I'm exquisitely aware. I'd actually sent you an email about that during the session. The issue is, and certainly on the county side, with the many community grants that are granted by both the county executive and county council, they are prohibited from giving advance payments. They must be reimbursement that's per their county law. And although some of us have tried to work with the nonprofits, we just couldn't make that change. So I thank you. This is a workable solution that really is great for the nonprofits who benefit from this, and really for the residents who get the services. So thank you.
Thank you. I hope you'll help us, both as a city council member and your job with the county, to help spread the word, because having the money available doesn't do anything unless the battered women's shelter, the homeless shelter, the food pantry, anyone sort of knows about it and helps with their cash flow.
I absolutely will.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Plakovich-Carr?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll add my thanks to what my colleagues have already said for all of your hard work, and especially for all of just the additional funds that you bring to the city each year as a delegation. I just briefly wanted to ask about the Maryland Trust Act and what you all think the prospects might be for last year. As you know, we have legislation pending here in Rockville. We're set to take up again next month, but just wondering what's happening at the state level.
It was a really controversial issue that lasted the entire session. I was proud to be a co-sponsor. It was amended significantly, but the House took action. If you want to.
Yeah, I also supported it, and you know, this is a classic example of an issue that's very, very controversial. It touches upon an issue that's been before the national headlines, of course, because of the election in November of 2016. It's our hope that we can move forward. Again, you know, the House moved it. It's just a little more of a challenge in the Senate committee that it's involved in, and of course, our senator is never the problem. So in any case, it's a work in progress, and we're going to try and move forward on that.
Councilmember Pershale, I apologize.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, specifically to Delegate Barve, I would just love to sit down with you and talk to you about stormwater management.
Sure.
So when I walked the city, I also walked a lot of the streams and around county facilities, including Montgomery College, and I think I took some pictures and I have some insights about maybe some approaches that can finally work. But I'd love to do that with you. But and
I look forward to that.
Okay. And we've heard, you know, I think it has been a productive session. I will say that since I've been seriously watching this council, it's probably one of the better group efforts, meaning group, you all, us all, whatever. I think that we work together pretty well, better than it had been in the past. I do have sort of the big question to me in this day and age is if there should be significant federal budget cuts, including layoffs. You know, even the administration not spending money that's been allocated, all this kind of stuff, and I know the state and the county and the city is worried about what are the downstream effects of all that. What's going on at the state level to anticipate that, to plan for it, to react to it, because I know you have budget challenges anyway, but this could, you know, with your big federal workforce.
Right. Well, as Senator Kagan mentioned, of course, we are going to backfill any cuts to Planned Parenthood. But the unfortunate fact is we can't do that for every program, Medicare, Medicaid. There's just too much money involved. And, you know, it really is an issue that's going to be very present for us unless there's a change at the federal level in the Congress, whether it's the House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate, with respect to which party is in power. To a very, very great extent, we are at the mercy of the federal government, unfortunately. And elections, as they say, have consequences. And for the Washington metro area, especially north of D.C., where so much of the federal spending is not in defense. As you know, President Trump wants to increase the national defense budget even more than the generals and admirals want it to be increased. And that may be a net plus for Northern Virginia, where a lot of the contractors around the Pentagon are located, but it may be a net negative for us. As we all read in the paper, there was another proposed cut to NIH, which is bad on so many levels it's hard to count. And I'm hopeful that even the Republican Congress will correct that decision as they have so far with respect to the Chesapeake Bay.
If I can just add one thing to that, our governor has been totally silent on some of the impending policy actions taken at the federal level, and we have tried to urge him, and this doesn't need to be Democrats versus Republicans. It's about looking out for the well-being of Maryland, of our budget, of our AAA bond rating, of our economic development opportunities. And you know, he didn't say anything about the cuts to the Chesapeake Bay or about so many issues and so many threats that have been before us. And we're hoping that he's going to start stepping up and speaking out. And I sympathize. I understand that he's trying to walk the line and try to be as moderate appearing as we near an election year next year. But it's really not okay. We really need his voice and his leadership, and I'm hoping to see that.
Thank you. Councilmember Priscilla.
To follow up, I'm just going to say that there's something out there I call the scenario from hell, and you've described half of it. That is, you know, budget cuts, and you're trying to backfill. But the part one is increased need, because the federal government would diminish its support for key programs and whatever. The other part is just reduced revenue at the state level, county level, city level, because you don't have the income tax income you've had before. You don't have maybe the property value increases you've had before. And so I think, certainly something we're looking at city and county level is, how do we react to this? How do we re-energize those economic assets to make up for, all these good federal salaries that may not be there in the same number. They may be some layoffs, but there may just not be as many opportunities for young college graduates to have those jobs.
So, as you all know, we're in session just for 90 days, and it's really hard. When we started, President Obama was still in office, and so all of a sudden it was inauguration in the first few months, and we don't know what's going to happen and whether Congress is going to go along and to what degree, what sort of agency actions may imperil our state. But I don't think it would be appropriate to act rashly. I was really glad that I was just appointed to the Joint Committee on Federal Relations, so that I can help be a liaison between Maryland and Capitol Hill and help make sure I have those conversations. The President of the Senate just also made me chair of the Joint Committee for the Management of Public Funds. So kind of how prudently we budget, audit, oversight, and asking questions about whether we're pinching our pennies wisely enough. And we're coming up with a very active agenda for that in the coming months.
I'd just love to sit down and talk to you about this, because I think whereas there are specific things you cannot do yet, because you don't really know what the situation will be, there are certain things you can do to set the groundwork. And
anytime.
We
Love it.
welcome that.
Yeah.
And just to follow up and kind of conclude, I want to say you are always available, and I appreciate that from each and every one of you. I have never had an opportunity I've never had the situation where I needed an opportunity with you and I couldn't get it. So I thank you for that. And I want to thank you for the bond bill. You mentioned it briefly, Senator, but very, very helpful. And we are in the process of hearing from the task force. They're going around to other groups. They'll be presenting to the mayor and council in June. And I look forward to hearing what they are recommending and then whatever happens. But thank you for your continued support for us to keep a historic treasure moving forward. I also wanted to thank you for your support, of the cancellation, I'm going to say this right, of the comptroller's misallocation of funding.
Right.
I want to say that correctly, but we very much appreciate that, and I know the Montgomery chapter took a strong stance and really appreciate that you all got that done, because that is a huge help to a lot of municipalities.
Credit to Senator Rich Madaleno in the district next door. He envisioned it, fought for it, and got that done, and it's so important to all of our cities and towns.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And finally, I just want to say that though I will not be the chair of the legislative committee next year, yes, you have not heard the end of HUR funding.
MML, right.
Yeah, and we're
How to use the
strategizing
revenue.
going forward to how we're going to do it next year so that it is even more apparent to those who don't seem to understand that that is actually municipal money
Right.
that needs to come back to the municipalities.
I think the trick is going to be starting early enough and moving it early enough that it's not after the budget has already passed, because the budget people were sort of freaking out about where that money would come from because we had already enacted the state budget.
And I want to compliment both you and Ryan Spiegel for pointing out repeatedly the fact that, 1.2 million Marylanders live in municipalities? 1.5, excuse me. And a lot of people really hadn't heard that statistic in that way, and I want to thank you for stating it that way, and it's something that I now repeat ad nauseum.
Super. It just is a mental thing. 1.5 million versus 157. You just get that.
Right.
So anyway, thank you. And thank you again for all your work and for being here tonight. We look forward to you getting some rest and a great next session.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.